Hello, everyone. How are we doing? Have you had lunch? No? Okay, give it up for lunch. Yeah. Should have skipped that one. Guys, we have a very creative talk ahead of us with Fawzi Mesmar. Currently, he's creative director at Ubisoft, but he has a notable resume, working as principal game designer at Gameloft, studio director at King, and head of design at DICE. He's worked on titles such as Battlefield 2042, Star Wars Battlefront, Battlefield 5, Candy Crush, the list goes on. He's here to talk to you about the creative process based on science and his own experiences. So please welcome Fawzi Mesmar.
Thank you so much. Oh, hello everybody. How are y'all doing? I got lights in my eyes, so I might do a little bit of this every now and then to see you. Thank you for coming in to hear me blab about creativity. I'm so happy to be here and to have a chat with you all. So before we start, I want to introduce myself. So my name is Fawzi. I'm a game designer. I started my career as a game designer in Jordan. That's where I'm from, working on a lot of different indie games. Some of them were like the first of their kind in the region, actually. Worked on everything from a PC 360 game, Facebook PHP games, music trivia Flash games, some very stereotypical farming games. And through a long story, ended up working with the guys in Atlas on the Persona franchise. But that's a story for another day, I guess. From Jordan, I took a short detour. I moved over to New Zealand as I joined Gameloft. This is the picture of myself and the My Little Pony team and the Prime Minister of New Zealand at the time, Mr. John Key. My Little Pony went on to become not only Gameloft's top grossing game that year, or one of them at least, it was also one of the top grossing games in New Zealand. That's why he showed up, because he wanted to see where all the money was coming from. But the success of that game allowed us to grow from 50 people to over 250, and we made all kinds of IP-based games. So we worked on an Ice Age game. Here's a picture of me with a bunch of penguins. Worked on Littlest Pet Shop, worked on Pastry Paradise, worked on a game tie-in for Amazing Spider-Man 2 at the time. That's the movie with Jamie Foxx. And with the studios in Spain, we worked on a game tie-in for Despicable Me 2 at the time called Minion Rush, which went on to become one of the top 10 most downloaded games of all time, actually. From Gameloft, I took another detour where I joined Inish in Japan as a creative director. So Inish is an independent studio that does a lot of co-development with other studios within the country. I lived and worked in Tokyo. That's our office building. I was the only person on my team that was not Japanese. Most of the games we worked on were for the Japanese market only on PlayStation Vita and smartphones. So chances are you haven't heard of many of the games I worked on. But I'll tell you about them anyway. I worked on Sendai no Kyoshin, 12 Odins, Yurukami, Crouton, and like it depends on how much you know your manga. I worked on some deep weeb shit in my time over there. From Japan, I moved over to Germany as I joined King. So in Berlin, I was head of design of the studio director of design, working mostly with the Candy Crush franchise. We worked at Candy Crush Jelly and Original and a bunch of other games. We were also known as the studio of the slide. This is how we moved from one floor to the other. And at the bottom is a picture of Angela Merkel when she came and visited our studio, and she made a Candy Crush level. It was a very easy level to beat, actually. We never really released that one, but it's kind of fun to see her do it. From King, I took my shortest detour where I moved over to Sweden as I joined DICE. So at DICE, I was head of design, so I was managing all of the game designers, creative directors, level designers. Most of the design team reported to me. That was like a team of around 95 people. And I was responsible of the creative output of the entire studio. So that involved the live service for Battlefront 2 and Battlefield 5, as well as the release of Battlefield 2042. Since then, I've now been living between France and Sweden as I joined Ubisoft, and that's where I currently am. Yay! So first I joined Ubisoft as VP Editorial, working with studios across Europe on bringing the creative vision to life. So I worked with the guys in Milan on bringing in Mario Rabbids Sparks of Hope to release on the Switch, as well as the guys over here in Massive on Star Wars Outlaws. And as of last year, I started working as creative director on Beyond Good and Evil 2 in Montpellier. That's why I'm back and forth between Sweden and France for the time being. In 2018, I released my book, Al-Khallab في فن تصميم الألعاب, or Al-Khallab in the Art of Game Design. It's the first book to ever be written about the topic in Arabic. But it wasn't my first book. In fact, I wrote comic books in the past, 9 of them to be exact, where we co-authored these books trying to create superheroes for the Arab kids back in the day. It was a lot of fun doing this, and I can't wait till I could do it in the future, hopefully. Also, me and 2 other Arab game developers, Rami Ismail and Osama Dorias, we started recording ourselves chatting during the pandemic about game dev and Arab culture, and then we just end up talking about food most of the time. And we started recording ourselves. People started listening to us. So we did a bunch of these. I think we'll have over 100 episodes where we talk about game dev and Arab culture, and people keep on listening. And we really enjoy doing this whenever we can. A lot of fun talking with these guys. So as you can tell, I really love to talk about games. So I'm usually speaking about games in conferences, events, universities, you name it. And I'm on a jury for a bunch of things when it comes to game development. I'm very active within the scene. A lot of this talk is coming in from my latest book I released last Christmas called Demystifying Creativity on Originality in Game Development. So as you saw, I teach, and I also manage large design teams. So there was times in which I saw teams that almost want to quit their job to pursue an idea, but what they didn't know is that it was like the 3rd or 4th time I've seen that idea that week. So I started to think, like, this can't be a coincidence. There must be a reason why people keep coming up with very similar ideas, or there must be a method or a pattern in how ideas even come to pass. So I started to experiment, and I recorded a lot of my experiments and thoughts and ideas into this book, and from which I will share some thoughts with you guys today. So if we're going to talk about creativity, I guess we could start with a very fluffy question of, like, what is even creativity? Because for a lot of people, creativity is to create something. If I'm making something, then I'm being creative. And that is a definition I kind of disagree with. Because you and I could watch the same video on crochet, and we end up making the same scarf, and that would hardly be called creative now, would it? Or you and I could buy the same Lego set, and then we follow the step-by-step instruction, and we end up creating the same horse that's on the box. You know? In fact, if one of us ended up creating a horse that looks like this, that might be a bit more creative. And actually, this Lego set specifically, you follow the step-by-step instruction, you end up creating this horse instead of the one on the box. Maybe that's creative. So creativity is not to recreate. If something has been made, you make more and more of it, that's not the thing that would be called creative. The Parthenon, for example, once stood as a miracle of architecture on top of Mount Acropolis, with a beautiful natural lighting and a golden statue in between. And even though it's now not exactly like that, it still stands the test of time as a miracle of human ingenuity in architecture. There's a 1-to-1 replica of the Parthenon in Nashville, Tennessee, complete with the interior lighting and the golden statue that goes within it. So even though this is probably the only intact Parthenon in the world, it still doesn't get the label creative. So even if I would actually start to build the Tower of Babylon right now, and it will be the only Tower of Babylon in the world, it still would not be called creative, because the Tower of Babylon has existed at some point. Creativity is not uniqueness. Creativity is when something or an idea that is completely unprecedented, something that is so new that it becomes the origin of inspiration of everything that comes after it. This is where the term originality comes from. It's an idea that is the origin of inspiration from everything that comes after that. So as I told you before, I teach. And I approach the class generally, and I ask them for an exercise in which can they come up with an idea from their everyday life. And no matter where in the world that I give this class, whether it's in Europe or in Asia or in the Middle East, there's always categories of ideas that appear in every class. Like there's always 1 or 2 ideas about commute, 1 or 2 or 3 ideas about travel, or some ideas about cooking or taking care of the kids. And so whatever we're doing regularly will always come up in ideas that we're doing. And that became even more apparent for me when I started to do these classes remotely in 2020. And travel and commute completely disappeared. And they were replaced by contact tracing or avoiding people at the supermarket. Every class had an idea about avoiding people at the supermarket. So it's very clear that what we do inspires us. The things that is affecting us in our lives, the things that we're doing regularly, will without a doubt start to show up in our ideas. So inspired by this, me and the design leadership at King, we were like, we were working at a company that had over 250 designers. So we're like, can we survey the designers and ask them questions in terms for us to get to understand them a little bit better? And the management accepted, and then we started bombarding them with all kinds of questionnaires. The first of which we asked them, like, where do you come up with ideas? And to make the chart easier to read, 12% come up with ideas while in the bathroom or in bed, 13% come up with their ideas while they're walking, while 14% come up with their ideas either with other games or driving or in public transport. So we started to get an understanding about what our average designer kind of looks like. And we started to ask them a lot more other questions. So we found out that on average, they played 10 plus hours of games a week. This was in 2017, so from 250 designers, each one of them was at least playing one of these 3 games, if not all of them. And they all, if they weren't game designers, they would have been writers or movie makers. And these are the shows that they grew up watching. And of course, we had to ask them what superpower would they have, and they chose either flight or teleportation. So out of 250 designers, they all wanted to be Dr. Strange, basically. So even at a sample size of this large, there's a lot of commonalities. And if what we do inspires us, then we'll without a doubt start to come up with very similar ideas. That might explain why if a lot of people read a popular novel like Battle Royale, and a lot of them are game developers, then we start to see Battle Royale in all kinds of things. And if a lot of us come up with ideas while we're playing video games, it might explain why once a monumental or inspirational video game like Dark Souls comes out, we start to see it in all kinds of video games as well. With the exception of Sekiro here at the bottom, none of these games have anything to do with From Software, but they all are deeply inspired by Dark Souls. This might also explain why these completely 3 different video games were announced at the exact E3 a few years back. So you start to think to yourself, what's going on? It seems like whenever someone has an idea, a lot of other people have that same idea. In fact, when I was trying to find a meme to put on the slide for this joke, I find all these other memes that did exactly the same thing. So it seems quite possible that 2 people can come up with that same idea. So how do we even arrive at originality? So originality is making something novel, like we said. So how do we even get there? This painting is called Impression Sunrise. For the artists over there, they must have recognized it immediately. Monet wanted to capture the sunrise of his hometown harbor in the way that he saw it. And he wanted to submit this painting in the Salon de Paris at the time, which was completely refused. Because the critics said, what, you call this art? You got to keep in mind that this was what the standards for art were at the time. You have to hone your skills to the point that you can render lifelike objects on a canvas, you know? Except when Monet and other Impressionists were starting to work, the camera was invented. So what the artists worked their entire lives to hone their skills at was done in seconds. So instead of rendering what they're seeing exactly as is, what Monet wanted to do and other Impressionists was to render how the world appears to them. In fact, Cézanne says it in a perfect way. He says, he wants to make visible how the world touches us. So originality, to some extent, is not rendering what you see. It's rendering how what you see is making you feel, to some extent. It's your own personal experience. And probably no one is better than translating their own personal experience into games than this guy. Miyamoto is famous into diving into his childhood and experiences that he's had to create gameplay experiences. For example, there's a story that he used to wander around his hometown, and he used to look into rain pipes on the sides of the building, and he used to wonder what's on the other side. As a kid, he used to think that if I manage to shrink myself and go into this pipe, I can come out at another world at the other side. So when you know that story about Miyamoto, you kind of come to understand how the green pipes in Mario came to be. So it's a game mechanic in which you come into a pipe, literally, and come out at another world at the other side. He also used to wander the rice fields around his neighboring region in Kyoto with a wooden sword in hand as he slashes through rice grass blades, going on all kinds of imaginary adventures to rescue the princess. Recalling his childhood will get you to understand how he ended up coming up with the exploration sense that came up in The Legend of Zelda. One of the most beloved gaming franchises of all time comes directly from Miyamoto, translating his childhood musings into a gameplay. This game is called Tomogarashi. So in school kids in Japan, there's teams of two, and they try to roll a ball roughly one kid size from start line to finish line, and a team that gets there first wins. And that ball is heavy, and stuff kind of gets stick to it. And as the ball is rolling, more and more stuff gets stuck to it, and it kind of gets a little bit challenging. Keita Takahashi played this game as a kid. So when you kind of know these two stories together, you come to understand how Katamari Damacy came to be. And for those who don't know the game, you play as this tiny green character who starts to roll a tiny ball, roughly a pencil sharpener size. And then as you roll it, stuff starts sticking to it as it grows bigger and bigger in size until like planets and galaxies and all kinds of stuff stuck to his ball. Probably one of the most creative games of our time. Comes directly from Takahashi, translating his personal experience into a video game. So inspired by this myself, I once again approached the class and asked them, can you come up with gameplay ideas from your childhood? I thought maybe it's the childhood is where we can dive into coming up with these originalities. And again, there were things in which every class had ideas that we've seen everywhere because it's all experiences that we've had as kids. So there was always ideas about hide and seek, or the floor is lava, or happy sack racing. These are all games that we've played as kids. But there was always this one student that was a little bit different. She was in Jordan, and she had this, when she was a kid, her apartment building was at the rooftop of a hospital. And she remembers that when the school bus used to come to work, to pick her up, she needed to run through the wards of the hospital to take the school bus to school. She was like, that might be an interesting setting for a video game. There was also this other student. This guy was in Sweden. When he grew up, he was in the countryside of Sweden. I forgot where exactly. And his school was built on top of a graveyard. And him and his friends, they used to go out in recess, and they used to live in all kinds of spooky adventures. And he was like, that might be an interesting setting for a video game. If you want to take something from this talk, this is one of the major points that I'd like you to take. What are the odds of somebody watching a very popular movie that millions and millions of people have seen? There are also game developers that want to make something about it. Probably quite high, right? But what are the odds of somebody growing up on the rooftop of a hospital to become a game developer, to wanting to make a game about this topic? Originality, to some extent, is the odds game. What are the odds of people to come up with that idea? What are the odds of all these reasons for the idea to even exist? And in other words, originality is statistically unlikely ideas. So there's a bit of an odds game when you're coming up with an idea. There was also this one student. She was in Tokyo. And her idea was in commute. So it's again on a train. And we mentioned that commute is an idea that is quite common. But her idea was that she wants to look at as many people as possible on the metro without making eye contact. And then the minute she makes eye contact, they all turn to flaming demons and they come and attack her, and it's game over. So even though commute is a common idea, she had a very different perspective on commute. So there is a part of originality of looking at statistically what are the odds of somebody thinking about parts of the world like that. In other words, your perspective can make common things unique. So one of the things you can look at, in addition to rare experiences, is rare perspectives on the world. Originality is how you personally twist things. It's how you perceive things and you do your personal twist on them. I'm going to give you a few examples from movie. First of all, I'm going to spoil the shit out of this movie, so I'm very sorry for anybody who hasn't seen it. Licorice Pizza is written, directed, and produced by Paul Thomas Anderson. And it revolves around a high school student that was also a movie star that starts dating a much older woman that is also a photographer on yearbook day. And then they go out on all kinds of adventures in 70s LA, including running a waterbed business and a pinball business. And I watched this movie and I was thinking to myself, what the fuck is going on? How did they come up with all of these random series of events to make this movie about? So I started to read interviews with Paul. And it turns out that the movie comes from two parts. The first part is Paul Thomas Anderson was picking up his kid on yearbook day. They were taking their photographs on yearbook day. And in the line, one of the kids in the line started to hit on the much older photographer. And he thought to himself, this kid thinks he has a chance. I wonder what kind of relationship that would be. And he started to muse about that idea. The rest of the movie comes from his best friend, Gary Goitzman, who was a child movie star in the 70s. And you guessed it, started a waterbed business and a pinball business. So this movie that ended up being nominated and winning nominated for 5 Academy Awards, including Best Original Screenplay, comes directly from Paul Thomas Anderson translating his experiences into a movie. Jonathan Nolan, not to be confused with Christopher Nolan, was writing the script for Westworld when he stumbled into an interview with Ken Levine on BioShock. Ken was talking about how the NPCs in BioShock Infinite, I think at the time, how the NPCs in BioShock Infinite, they had like a schedule. They wake up at a certain hour, they go through the street to work, they stay in that place for 8 hours, they walk back. Every NPC had a programmed routine in order for the world to feel believable for the player. And Nolan thought to himself, what? These games people who he has nothing to do with video games, by the way. And he started to say, like these game people, they create artificial people for the benefit of the player? That's crazy. And then he started to read more about it, and then he found out that it's also how the NPC system works in GTA. And that one inspired them to write the script for Westworld, basically to create a theme park that is filled with artificial people for the sole amusement of the one person who bought the ticket. We can't create what we don't know. Everything we make will, without a doubt, come from somewhere in our life journey. The guy that created Squid Game, for example, he was also a fan of Battle Royale. He wrote the book and he really liked this Japanese game show of either you win all the money or you die kind of thing. But he also remembers a time in his life in which he would have done anything for money. He was going through deep financial problems and he would have done anything for money. And that's what inspired him to write the script for Squid Game, which I think one of the most popular shows on Netflix. So this might explain why these 3 completely different video games, not that they're out and we played them, Ghost of Tsushima, Sekiro, and Neo 2, by the way, play completely differently because they're made by people in different parts of the world with different life experiences and life journeys, and each one of them adding a little bit of themselves to the thing that they make to make the game experience so much different. So I know some of you will be thinking, all right, Fawzi, I get it. You're telling me about using my life journey to be creative, but how exactly can I do that? So I've developed a concept I'm calling creative sobriety. So if there's another topic that you want to take from this talk, I urge you to consider this one. And it's best explained through an example. I would do this exercise in which I go up on the board and I would write the word color, and then I'd ask people in the room to say the first thing that comes to mind when they hear the word color. Quickly, they can think so that I immediately populate the first layer around the word color. And then from each one of those nodes, I do exactly the same thing over and over again. So you end up with quite a branching mind map of which like of word associations. So from color, I get white, white I get milk, milk I get cow, cow I get horse, horse I get unicorn. You know, there's a logical connection of association that gets you from one point to the other. Highly creative individuals, who people that tend to create original ideas at a much higher pace than others, when you say color, they think unicorn. They tend to skip several layers of association. It's usually connected with some kind of attention deficiency, in fact. This is why creative people tend to be the dreamers or the people that are like in their own worlds kind of thing. In fact, there is research that's been done to see a correlation between low-grade attention deficiency and creative output. So low-grade ADHD, low-grade autism actually can have a contribution to creative output, whereas patients with high schizophrenia, for example, show no sign of creative output. So it can be beneficial up until a certain point of impairment that it goes against you. And also, this is correlation, not causation. I need to double say this. But there is a correlation nonetheless. To analyze this chart once more, the first layer around the word color, I'm calling inevitable ideas. Because the level of connection between those is so simple that someone will inevitably think of it. Someone will inevitably think of white if you say color. So inevitable ideas are also time-to-market ideas. Because of their inevitability, if your idea is pink, and pink doesn't exist on the market right now, you better start making it. Because there's probably 4 people in their garage working on it right now. Creative sobriety is a practice in which you can trace back where did your idea come from. And if you can find out how many associations that you made to get there, you can intellectually push your idea deeper. For those of us who are not blessed with low-grade ADHD or autism. So creative sobriety is a practice of self-awareness. Where did that idea come from? How did I get here? And how can I intellectually improve my odds to get to statistically unlikely ideas? I'm going to give you this anecdote. A friend of mine was watching Squid Game, when it came out. And he loved it. He was like, man, if I make a Squid Game game right now, I'm going to be so rich. So he grabbed his laptop and he started making a Squid Game game. And he was like, yeah, I'm just, move when she speaks and I stop when she stops, adding like those, the pin stuff, all of the stuff he saw on the show he wanted to make into this game. And then he thought to himself, wait a minute, maybe I should check if someone else has made a Squid Game game as well. Not only were there thousands of Squid Game games already out by the time he checked, actually Apple at the time banned people from submitting more Squid Game games because they were flooded with it. So what my friend did wrong is that he watched Squid Game, he liked it, and he wanted to do it. The odds of that happening is quite high. What he should have thought, or what he could have done differently, is he should have thought of his life journey and thought, what part of my life journey was stimulated by Squid Game, and why? And can I make a game about that, instead of about the input itself? The more we tie our ideas to ourselves and our life journeys, the more likely we are to be original. So I know a lot of you guys are probably thinking, Fawzi, we get it. You're telling us that we need to be original, but is that enough? What if my idea is too crazy? To which I will tell you, unfortunately, creativity is not just originality. Creativity stands also on another leg, which is value. So how do we even determine a value of an idea? I will explain it through a concept of examples. For example, my idea could be that I create a solar-powered flashlight that doesn't have a battery. That's an original idea, except if the room is dark, it's completely useless. I can't see anything. Or even better, I can come up with an idea that is waterproof tea bags. That's original. Except if I'm going to make tea, it's completely useless. So within a context of usefulness, this idea has no value. But if my context is I want to artistically challenge what tea bags even are, then that idea has some value. So value comes directly from the context in which we're creating. If my context is that my idea needs to generate money, and my idea doesn't, then it has no value. If my context is that the idea must hit you in the feels, bro, and it doesn't, then my idea has no value. Value comes directly from the context in which we're creating. It's essential for us to be able to determine it. So a lot of you guys are game devs, so I'm going to go a little bit technical here, but not too much. Regardless of how powerful hardware is, there's always a limit of how much shit we can have on screen at the same time. So at some point, no matter what we display on screen, we have to load shit out so that we can load shit in. And in order for us not to do it in front of the player, it would look really weird. We try to do it as far away from the camera as possible. We call that the clipping distance. The further away from the camera, the further we can load shit out so that we can load shit in. Usually on the horizon is the best place to do it. So as the hardware evolves, like the picture on the left is from the PlayStation 1, and the picture on the right is from the PlayStation 2. So as the hardware evolves, we actually can do more stuff, and we can have more stuff on screen, but inevitably, we still have to load shit out so that we load shit in. So we can push the clipping distance further, but it's still there, So the guys that were working on Silent Hill, they spent most of their poly budget on the character in the foreground, which meant that they couldn't push the distance so far. It had to be very close to the camera, which meant that stuff started popping out of nowhere right in front of the player, which looked really weird. And to that, they came up with a solution in which to cover the clipping distance with fog. They smothered the whole thing with fog so that the character will appear from the fog, and that's totally fine. But in fact, even the clipping distance was so close that they needed to even solve more problems around it because it appeared so suddenly. They were like, what if we put the radio on the character that made the noise before we loaded an object in? And that kind of notified the player that it's coming. They were coming up with all kinds of solutions. It comes directly from the idea of them putting fog on the clipping distance. And fog eventually became synonymous with the series. Like, you cannot think of Silent Hill without thinking of fog. In later series, it became connected to even the player's psyche, narratively, and that kind of thing. And actually, now whenever there's a foggy day in Stockholm, all of my friends' Instagram stories is saying, welcome to Silent Hill. It's like, talk about inevitable ideas. I get like 15 of the same joke. But it's that how connected the idea of fog is to the series. That's not directly from a technical constraint. So creativity, I would argue, always comes from some kind of constraint. Sometimes the constraint is obvious, like technical in this time, and sometimes it is not. Constraints can be technical. They could be financial, like how many people do you have to make a game, and then you make a game accordingly, or your budget, or even structural. And within that constraint is what empowers your creativity. Some of you might be familiar with haikus. Haikus are actually very rigid structurally. There are 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. That's it. And that's why they work in so many languages, because it's all about syllables, not about particular structure. This is a very rigid structure, but people have been writing creatively poetry for, I don't know, hundreds of years, if not thousands. So sometimes the constraints doesn't come from the outside, it comes from within. Sometimes you put a constraint on yourself based on what you like or what you dislike, and that is what we call creative vision. These are self-imposed constraints. Some of you might recognize who's the guy that directed these shots. Right? So I hear some mumblings of Wes Anderson, and you'd be correct. A lot of these shots are from Wes Anderson, except this one's made by AI. This one is a picture of the Tube in London. And this one is of a random bus stop in the south of the UK. All I took from a subreddit called Accidentally Wes Anderson. So Wes Anderson's creative vision is so strong that even things he didn't make start to look like he made them. And it's because he has a lot of distinct things that he likes. He likes symmetry in his shots. He likes the use of pastel colors. He likes his characters to either facing each other or face the camera. If you're a cinematographer that's going to work on a Wes Anderson movie, you kind of know what you're getting yourself into. Because he has a very clear definition of what he likes and what he dislikes. Nobody asked him to make movies this way. He imposed that on himself, and thus his entire staff. Personal preference, then, is a self-imposed constraint. So what you like, what you dislike, and how you judge that directly affects how you are creative. Sam Mendes, and this is his cinematographer, Dirk Keegan, they wanted to make a movie that appears like it's made in one shot when they were making 1917. This is a really difficult way to make a movie, guys, because that means that some of these shots can go up to 22 minutes long. That involves hundreds of extras that have to have perfect coordinations. One guy fucks up, he'll be like, all right, cut, that's it, everybody go back in the trenches, that put the explosions back in the hole, we're doing this all over again. This is not an easy way to make a movie. But it's also why this movie ended up getting nominated to 11 Academy Awards, because it was driving the creativity within it itself. The guys in Santa Monica wanted to do something very similar when they were working on the God of War game. They wanted to make a game that appears to be like a game made in one shot. No loadings whatsoever. You go directly from cutscene into the action, and there's no loading screen to interrupt your gameplay at all. This probably sent chaos throughout all the departments of the game dev scene, because they wanted to figure out solutions to how they were able to do this. This is probably why the game ended up with very long elevator rides, or very tiny hallways that you have to shimmy through because we need to load shit out while we load shit in so that we stop you from going back and forth. Or very long boat rides, because while you're on the boat ride, we have to load shit out so that we can load shit in so that it appears to be seamless. And in fact, the boat rides were long that posed the question, this might be boring. How do we entertain the players? Let's have Kratos and his son talk the entire duration of the boat ride. And if they step up, we'll stop the conversation, and then they pick it up once they go back. Very creative solution. Comes directly from the problem that comes directly from the creative vision. Nobody asked them to make a game like that, as far as I know. But it's a self-imposed constraint that they have on the entire project. And this is also why this game is so beloved. It's won numerous Game of the Year awards, and it inspires generations of game developers to try to find ways to eliminate loading. So basically what I'm trying to say, constraints are good, y'all. The more constraints we have, it's actually good. And what I'm urging you to do, in fact, is to try to find what are your constraints that you impose on yourself, that you might not be even aware of. Some of you might be asking, right, Fawzi, but you didn't answer that one question about what if people can't relate to my life story? What if my story is too weird? There are some things that we have all have experienced, no matter where we are in the world. We've all have fallen in love, we've all have our heart broken. So while we may never be able, you might not know what's it like to be heartbroken as Taylor Swift. You still know what it's like to be heartbroken. There's a universality of human experience. There is something that connects us all, no matter how different or wild our human experience is, because we have that universality. So there might not be that many people that imagine Italian plumbers who eat mushrooms. But I bet you each one of us has looked through a pipe at some point. There is a connection that guides us all. You might not have played Tomogorashi, but you might have seen a dung beetle. You might have rolled a ball at some point. There is something in your life experience that makes you connect, regardless if the source of inspiration is the same, because we have that universality and connection. And that comes into everything we do. So even if you're a programmer and you're supposed to make Mario jump, how high should Mario jump? Should he wiggle a little bit before he goes down? Should he go down slower than going up? Can I control him on his way up or down? So many decisions that you make. And each one of those decisions is probably connected to you at some point, go like, this height is good enough. And there's somewhere in your life journey that made you make that decision. And what I'm urging you is to practice creative sobriety and kind of reflect on that. Why do I like what I like? What part of my life journey led me to arrive at these conclusions? And how can I use that? Because when you're being able to identify your self-imposed constraints, that's at the heart of finding your creative voice. Being able to say why you like what you like, it's at the heart of being able to say what your creative vision is. So to conclude, we can't create what we don't know. Everything we do will without a doubt come from somewhere in our life experience. Creativity is generating ideas that are both original and of value. And originality, as we said, is statistically unlikely ideas. It's an idea so unprecedented that it's very unlikely for someone else to come up with it. Whereas value comes directly from evaluating the context in which we ideate. Why are we doing what we're doing, and how do we determine if we were successful or not? And self-imposed constraints are called creative vision. What I like, what I dislike, and why I pick something over the other is what we call a creative vision. And when you'll be able to practice creative sobriety, understand why are you inspired by certain things, what got you to this point, is key to finding your creative voice. Thank you very much. Thank you. Do you have time for Q&A? I'm not sure. Maybe you can take a couple of questions. Any questions?
Is the book available?
Yes, you can find it everywhere. Amazon, Google Books, wherever you get your books, you should be able to find it.
I don't have a question, but really good talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you. Yes, sir, in the back. The mic is coming to you. No worries. You can do both.
Yeah. So as an individual, did you find yourself kind of having a natural creative spirit when you were young?
Yeah, you know what? I think one of the reasons why I also wanted to look into this is because I was also like my design teams myself, in which I would come up with an idea, and then someone else releases the game, and I go I had that idea. I should have released it. And then I blame myself for being slow. And then I was like, when that happened once or twice or third times, now when that happens, I kind of get pissed at myself. I go that was an inevitable idea, it seems. You know, I wasn't putting enough of myself into it. You know, and that's a big reason why I'm here today talking to you guys. You know, because right now, inevitable ideas is eventually what AI is going to be for. You know, all of the stuff that will inevitably come, easy conclusion to make, that's gone. So I think right now, more than ever, we are challenged to be not only more original, but also more authentic. We are challenged more than ever to connect to ourselves and make shit that the AI can't. Awesome. So that's why I'm here today, specifically for this message.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you all. Yes, there's a gentleman over here.
Great talk.
Thank you.
You say we should practice creative sobriety in order to identify why we like what we like, but that doesn't seem so easy to me. So do you have any hints or techniques how to go about that?
100%. So one of the other reasons why I talk about creative sobriety and why I use the term sobriety is that probably a bunch of us at some point has worked with a director or a lead that knows good when they see that. And nobody likes to work with that guy, you know? Like, I know it's good when I see it, so you have to keep on guessing, you know? And almost always I discovered that it's not random. There's always a way of how you judge something is good or not. But the context was never really spoken about out loud. Not to yourself, not to the team, you know? So usually, like, you know, let's say you have a disagreement in your team about a creative idea, you know? A lot of the times people start to discuss the design, but it's never the problem. Most of the time people design for different problems, you know? They provided different solutions for the problem. So whenever you catch one of these conflicts of like, we should make the player fly faster, or we should make the character fly slower, you'd be like, all right, what problem are you trying to solve and what problem are you trying to solve? Because that might not be the same idea, you know? A lot of people often cite Ford when they say, if I asked people what they want, they would have told me faster horses, to dismiss kind of thoughts. I think that's a half-truth, because if what people were actually saying is that they wanted to get from point A to point B faster. Faster horses was a design, you know. A car is another. Speed boots could be a third, you know what I mean? So the idea of faster horses comes as a solution to a problem. What is that problem in that context? People want to get from point A to point B cheaply, fastly, safely. What solutions can we come up? That's a design. And whatever design we come up that satisfies those three criteria is going to be accepted, because those criteria were stated. In game development, a lot of the times they're not. One person wants to make money, one person wants to win a Game of the Year award, one person just wants cool art to put on their portfolio, and they're all sitting in the same room debating a design. And you need to put that on the table. It's a tough discussion, but it needs to be on the table, you know? If I'm making a smartphone game and someone wants precision Street Fighter input, that's a little bit tricky, you know? And if you're arguing over that, that's a problem. You know what I mean? Maybe they're rejecting the idea of making a smartphone game to begin with. If you solve that problem, you get to it. You know what I mean? I hope that answers your question. It's my pleasure. We have time for one more, I think. And help me, I don't see really from the stage. I'm doing this again now, as promised.
Are some constraints better than others? Is there a value judgment there?
A value judgment. Oh, there's a question in the back, but I'll answer your question while the mic gets there. Are there some constraints better than others? No. You need to identify all the constraints that you're working within, including your preference. You know? So in order for you to really be able to make a design that stands out, you need to understand the technicalities, for example, and what you like or you dislike. If you cover one over the other, there will be a problem. You satisfy the technicality, but then you don't really like it, you know? Or you really like it, but it's blowing up the machine, you know? It's actually, you know, to some extent, part of like answering the question from the gentleman from before. Rarely do we create an exhaustive list of constraints, actually. Rarely do we do that. Or we have the sobriety to be able to even add our own selves and egos into the discussion, which is a big part of the problem, you know? Sorry, sir, in the back.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much. I didn't have time to catch the whole speech, but the second half with finding and sort of defining your own creative vision, I think was super interesting.
Thank you.
And my question is, how can you keep working on your creative vision and sort of work with that, perhaps even, when you work in a big team with perhaps a director that has an idea or something like that?
So it's, again, about trying to put all the constraints out in the open, and there's also a part of it, like you reflecting inwards and saying, like, am I really okay with this? You know? So if the director has opinions that are not out, you need to find ways to get those out. Some people used to do option A and B to try to minimize the director's input. Some people would ask them tricky questions. Regardless of the method, and this is also why I hope that director also exercises sobriety, we need to be able to know why they like what they like in order for them to make the stuff that works. And usually it comes from what is the problem that they're trying to solve, you know? So I would urge you to be able to tackle and try to get as much of these constraints as possible. Now there's the second part that usually creates conflict, in which like sometimes the game project or whatever project you're on, their main target is to make money, let's say. And your target is like, I want to make art. I don't want to make money, you know? And if you're conflicted at that level, you will always have a conflict. So there's a part of you of kind of going like, do I accept these constraints and work within them? Or am I going to rebel against them, you know? And that's why it's important to put those out, even for yourself, you know? What's too much, what's too greedy, you know what I mean? There's all these metrics that we usually use in conversation that does not have a clear statement. And finding your creative voice is understanding how you're operating within all of this, even within a big company, and then what are you really okay with as well, you know? All of that needs to be on the table. You need to understand it, you know? I hope that answers your question. Thank you. We have 2 more questions. I think the person here and the person in the back. Do we have time? Volunteers, you kick me out when it's the time, you know? Otherwise, I'm taking questions all day. I don't mind.
Thank you. Great speech.
Thank you.
And how do you look at these constraints over time in a project? Because I guess they evolve also.
Yes.
And different contexts in the project as well.
Yes.
So let's say you start out with like outlining all your constraints and be very like transparent and open. Let's say we do that, and that's great. But then that can change as well, right?
Yeah,
so how
100%.
do you deal with that?
100%. So I go into a lot of details into this in the book, so I will really not pay justice the answer to your question. But the short answer of which, we start with the pillars. Everything should have pillars of why we're making the things we make. The pillars become the law that govern us, you know? And as even with the real life law, you know, at some point those laws become outdated, in which the team needs to lobby to change those laws, you know? So if things doesn't make sense anymore, we'll be like, well, it's written here and on the stone tablets. We need to have a regular check-in point in order for us to review that. And that could be buried into team retrospectives. So within every retrospective, we need to always check within the pillars that we talk about, does one thing stop making sense? And how can we evaluate it, you know? And you as the creative lead, you need to also not take it personally, you know, that somebody is challenging the tablets, you know, and that you'll be able to change them, you know. And the tricky part is that sometimes some people would challenge it with lack of information. It's also your job to pick that up, you know. When is the challenge real and when is the challenge because the person does not know? And I also dive a lot deeper into like how do we constantly communicate to make sure that we minimize the person not knowing. But you know, the bigger the project, the more complicated that is. But it's part of the challenge of being a creative lead. How do you balance your own self-doubt with the team self-doubt with the facts? And you operate within them. That means you need more feedback from multiple sources, you know? You need to find ways to validate yourself. I hope that answers your question. It's my pleasure. So, one more or are we done? Huh? You're not aware. In the back? We're done. Thank you guys so much. Find me around everywhere. Cheers. Thank you.